People thought love was loud. Kweku Mensah knew better. Love was quiet. It lived in what lingered after conversations ended, after glasses emptied, after urgency dissolved into stillness. Love was what people hoped someone else would notice without being asked. It existed in pauses, in restraint, in what remained unsaid. That was where he listened, where he paid attention, where he learned what people feared losing most without ever asking them directly. He sat alone at the bar with a book open in front of him, though he hadn't turned the page in a long time. The words didn't matter. The room did. The pauses in conversation, the way loneliness leaned subtly toward company. He noticed her the moment she walked in. Not because she was the most beautiful woman there, but because she hesitated at the door, as if deciding whether she had the strength to stay. That hesitation told him everything he needed to know. Amma hadn't planned to meet anyone that night. The bar was dim and forgettable, chosen because no one she knew would be there. The divorce papers were folded in her purse, their edges pressing against her hip like something sharp she couldn't put down. She ordered wine she didn't particularly like just to feel decisive about something. That was when she noticed the man 2 stools away, quiet, still, and strangely attentive. He wasn't staring. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to be seen. He was simply present, and that unsettled her more than confidence ever had. Presence felt deliberate, dangerous even. She told herself it meant nothing, yet her attention kept drifting back to him, to the way he seemed aware of the room without claiming it, as though he were listening for something only he could hear. "You look like you're waiting for someone," she said before she could stop herself. The words surprised her as soon as they left her mouth, too personal for a stranger, too revealing for someone who had planned to sit alone and disappear into the evening. She waited for embarrassment to arrive, but instead there was only curiosity, sharp and unavoidable. "I was," he replied, closing the book slowly, his movements unhurried. "But maybe they were waiting for you instead?" The line was ridiculous, almost theatrical, and she knew she should dismiss it. Instead, she laughed, the sound lighter than she felt, and slid onto the stool beside him, already aware that something had shifted. They talked for hours, though neither could later say exactly what about. He let silence do the work, never rushing to fill it, never forcing intimacy too soon. Names came later, after comfort had settled in. When Amma mentioned her divorce, he didn't react the way most men did. He didn't rush to console her or offer sympathy like currency. He simply waited, giving her space to finish the thought she hadn't yet found the words for. "That kind of ending changes how a person breathes," he said quietly, as if stating a fact rather than offering comfort. The words landed deeper than she expected. Amma swallowed, surprised by the sudden pressure behind her eyes. No one had ever described it that way before. Most people tried to soften endings, to make them smaller. He acknowledged the weight without trying to remove it. Most men reacted too quickly, eager to prove they were different. Kweku simply stayed. When he touched her wrist, it was deliberate but gentle, like permission asked without words. The contact lingered just long enough to be noticed, just briefly enough to feel respectful. Amma didn't pull away. She felt seen in a way that didn't demand anything from her in return. By the time she left, he already understood what kind of love she would want. Reassurance disguised as freedom. Stability that didn't feel like control. He gave her his number instead of asking for hers, letting the choice remain hers. It mattered. He waited until morning to text. "Good morning. I hope today is kind to you." The simplicity of it made her smile. She replied within minutes. Falling in love didn't feel like falling. It felt like settling into something that had been waiting for her all along. Kweku became part of Amma's routine so gradually she barely noticed when reliance replaced choice. He remembered her schedule, her moods, the anxieties she laughed off but carried anyway. When she mentioned trouble sleeping, he called instead of texting. When she canceled plans, he didn't question her reasons. He never rushed intimacy, never pressed when she hesitated. That restraint made everything feel safe. Amma told herself she was being careful, that she was moving slowly, that this was different from before. She didn't notice how often she checked her phone, how frequently she adjusted her plans to match his, how natural it felt to center him in the small decisions of her day. The shift was subtle. The day she apologized for bothering him. The night she asked if he was upset when he hadn't replied immediately. The moment she admitted she didn't know what she would do without him. Each confession was small, reasonable on its own. Together, they formed something heavier. Kweku heard them all and held her closer, offering reassurance without ever correcting her dependence. They were lying together when she mentioned the insurance policy. Her voice was casual, almost thoughtful. She said she'd taken it out after the divorce so her family wouldn't have to deal with everything if something happened. Kweku kept his breathing steady. Planning, he said, was a form of care. Responsibility was love expressed quietly. He didn't ask questions. He didn't suggest changes. 3 days later, she told him she'd updated the beneficiary. She wanted someone she trusted, someone who would take care of things if she couldn't. The words felt intimate, heavier than any declaration of love. Kweku kissed her hair, his expression calm, his pulse unchanged. Trust, he knew, was the most valuable currency a person could offer another human being. Amma's death shocked everyone. The details were strange but not suspicious enough to linger over. The world was full of unfortunate endings, and people were practiced at accepting them. Kweku cried at the funeral, his grief visible and convincing. He held her sister's hands, paid for flowers, spoke softly of fate and loss. No one questioned the claim. Grief made him untouchable. There were others after Amma. Different lives, different stories, but the same hope in their eyes. He never rushed between relationships. That would have looked suspicious. He allowed time to pass, allowed grief to settle, allowed memory to soften. He mourned publicly and privately, playing his role with care. And when the time came, he collected what had been promised. Detective Zara Okoye first saw his name buried in numbers. She worked financial crimes, not homicide, and she wasn't looking for him when the repetition caught her attention. Same beneficiary, different women, years apart. Patterns fascinated her. Numbers didn't lie, but they did whisper. She leaned closer, listening for what this one was trying to say. She requested the files. The deaths were frustratingly inconclusive. No clear cause, no violence, no evidence that would satisfy a courtroom. Just timing, just vulnerability, just a man who always survived. Zara stared at his photo longer than necessary. He looked like someone you would trust. That realization unsettled her more than the lack of proof ever could. When she met him, he was warm, polite, and visibly worn by grief. He spoke carefully, answered questions without defensiveness, met her eyes without challenge. When he looked at her, she felt a pull she hadn't expected, a subtle sense of recognition that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with understanding. It scared her more than suspicion ever could. That night, she couldn't sleep. She realized Kweku didn't kill. He structured dependency. He positioned himself as emotional infrastructure, so essential that when life faltered, there was no safety net without him. He didn't push people toward endings. He let their fear and trust do the work. Love became the mechanism, not the motive. That insight settled heavily in her chest. When scrutiny tightened, Kweku adjusted. Panic was sloppy, and he had never been sloppy. He slowed his life down, reduced appearances, became absence instead of presence. Still, he felt her watching. Zara Okoye. Careful women were dangerous, but predictable once you understood what they feared. Zara feared connection, and he knew exactly how to use that. He met Maya at a charity fundraiser. She was younger, widowed, cautious in a way that came from experience rather than fear. Her grief wasn't fresh. It was ingrained. That made her ideal. He introduced himself without flourish, let her speak, let trust bloom slowly. Across the street weeks later, Zara saw them together by accident and felt something sharp twist inside her. He was starting again. Maya liked that Kweku never made promises. Promises had failed her once already, had shattered under the weight of reality, and left her careful in ways she hadn't expected. Kweku spoke instead of time and presence, of showing up without claiming ownership. She told him about independence that sometimes felt like exile, about how surviving alone could become a habit that was hard to break. He listened without interruption, without correction. He did not become essential too quickly. He let her keep her routines, her distance, her sense of control. He allowed her to believe she was choosing him freely, which she was. He simply shaped the conditions around the choice. When she reached for him, it felt like her idea. That mattered more than affection. Trust, once again, arrived quietly. Zara dug deeper. She requested financial histories, insurance timelines, beneficiary changes. Slowly, a shape emerged. Each woman had taken out or updated a policy within months of meeting Kweku. On its own, it meant nothing. Together, it closed in on certainty. Zara felt the familiar tension of being right without being able to prove it. The most dangerous place an investigator could stand. Maya invited Kweku to her apartment for dinner. He noticed everything. The framed photo she never moved, the careful order of the room, the way she avoided talking about the future. When she leaned against him afterward, her head resting lightly on his chest, he felt the moment settle into place. The groundwork was complete. Outside, unnoticed, Zara watched from across the street, unofficial and uneasy. Zara followed him that night without authorization, without backup, telling herself she just needed confirmation. She watched him walk Maya home, watched the way he waited until she was safely inside before turning away. That tenderness unsettled her more than cruelty ever could. It was convincing. It was practiced. It was the most dangerous thing about him. Maya mentioned the insurance policy without realizing what she was doing. She said her husband had insisted she keep it, that changing anything afterward had felt wrong. Kweku spoke gently about planning, about honoring the past without being trapped by it. He framed the future as permission rather than betrayal. The idea settled into her mind like relief, quiet and reasonable. Zara knew she should step back. She was too close, too invested. Instead, she agreed to meet Kweku again. During their conversation, he observed calmly that she didn't trust easily. For a moment, Zara wondered what it would feel like to be understood by him rather than analyzed. The thought frightened her more than any evidence she'd seen so far. Maya updated her beneficiary and didn't tell him. She told herself it was practical, not emotional, something she'd been meaning to do for years. She wanted it to be a surprise, proof that she was choosing him freely. The decision felt empowering in the moment, a small act of control she believed belonged entirely to her. A nervous analyst called Zara late at night. Another claim was forming, he said. Same structure, same beneficiary. Zara sat up in bed, heart pounding. Kweku sensed resistance again, the subtle tightening of the world around him. Zara wasn't just observing anymore. She was emotionally invested. That made her unpredictable, and unpredictability was dangerous. Maya overheard two women in a grocery store talking about a man who had lost another girlfriend. The details were vague, but the description felt too close. That night, she searched Kweku's name. Nothing alarming appeared. Nothing reassuring either. Absence, she realized, could be louder than accusation. Zara and Kweku collided outside Maya's building. Their eyes met, recognition passing instantly between them. He smiled, calm and knowing. In that moment, Zara understood something chilling. He knew she was watching, and he wasn't afraid. That realization lodged in her chest like a warning she couldn't ignore. That night, something went wrong. An interruption, a delay, a variable Kweku hadn't accounted for. Nothing irreversible, but enough to fracture the careful rhythm he relied on. For the first time in years, he felt urgency. Not fear. Urgency meant he would have to move sooner than planned. Maya confronted him gently. She asked if he had ever loved someone who hadn't survived it. The question was quiet, almost tender. He said yes. It was close enough to the truth to feel honest. The answer changed the air between them, though neither spoke about how. Zara sat outside Maya's building when messages arrived from an unknown number. Protection, the text said, was just control dressed nicely. Zara replied before she could stop herself. Neither of them, she said, got to define it alone. The exchange left her shaking, aware she had crossed another invisible line. Kweku remembered the first woman who had trusted him completely. She hadn't died because he wanted her to. She died because she believed he would save her. That lesson had shaped everything that followed. Love created expectations. Expectations created vulnerability. He learned to remove himself from the moment of collapse and let belief do the rest. Maya didn't sleep. She opened the insurance document, her cursor hovering over the beneficiary field. For a long moment, she considered changing it back, erasing the choice she had made. Instead, she closed the file without saving. She told herself that was enough, that uncertainty could be protective. Zara went to her supervisor with patterns rather than accusations. The response was calm, procedural, dismissive. There was nothing actionable yet. Zara understood then that if this ended, it wouldn't be because the system intervened. It would be because she did something irreversible herself. Kweku invited Maya to dinner in public. Neutral ground, safe appearances. She asked if he had ever been investigated. He asked whether it felt like he had. Before either could say more, Zara walked into the restaurant and asked to speak with Maya alone. The tension at the table was immediate and unmistakable. Outside, Zara spoke carefully. Patterns, timing, risk. No accusations, only warnings. Maya listened, her hands shaking, the truth assembling itself piece by piece. When she returned inside, she asked Kweku for space. He agreed without argument. That calm acceptance frightened her more than resistance ever would have. 2 days later, an alert crossed Zara's desk. A death. Not Maya. Another woman. Different city. Same beneficiary. Zara felt the ground shift beneath her. She had been watching the wrong door, guarding the wrong moment. Kweku had never been limited to one story at a time. A message arrived on her phone. She had chosen proximity, it said. He had chosen scale. The implications settled over her with crushing clarity. This wasn't a mistake. It was a system. A letter arrived at Zara's apartment that night. Inside was an unsigned insurance policy, the beneficiary line left blank. Beneath it, a familiar sentence about fear and loss, an invitation disguised as a question. Zara stood alone in the dark as messages came in. She understood him now, the text said. That made her dangerous. Outside, somewhere close, a car door closed softly, deliberately, as if to be heard. Zara didn't move, and understood, with terrifying clarity. This wasn't over. It was just beginning.